The carriage wheels creaked to a halt outside the Red River Saloon in the dusty heart of Texas. And when the door opened, every man within 50 feet stopped what he was doing to stare at the woman who emerged. Her face hidden behind a black veil that suggested mourning, but concealed something far more terrible. Gideon Jameson was mending a fence behind the livery stable when he heard the commotion. And though he tried to mind his own business as his father had taught him, something about the way the woman moved made him set down his tools and walk around to the front. She was tall, her posture rigid as a rifle barrel, and she clutched a small leather case against her ribs like it contained all her worldly possessions. Maybe it did. The year was 1874, and Red River had seen its share of mysterious arrivals, but something about this woman felt different. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the packed dirt Main Street, and Gideon watched as she stood there, seemingly uncertain where to go next. The stagecoach driver had already unloaded her single trunk and was climbing back up to his perch, eager to be on his way. "Madam," Gideon heard himself say, stepping forward before he could think better of it, "you look like you might need some help." She turned toward him, and even through the veil he could feel her eyes assessing him. When she spoke, her voice was cultured, Eastern, and trembling just slightly. "I am looking for the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson's establishment, if it still exists." "Yes, madam. It's just down the street. I can carry your trunk there if you'd like." She hesitated for a long moment, and Gideon wondered if she would refuse. Finally, she nodded. "That would be kind of you, Mr. Jameson. Gideon Jameson. Most folks just call me Gid." "Fiona Thompson," she replied, and offered nothing more. Gideon hoisted her trunk onto his shoulder and started walking. It was heavier than he expected, and he found himself curious about what she carried. Fiona walked beside him, her stride purposeful despite the obvious exhaustion in her bearing. Up close, he could see that her black dress was expensive but travel-worn, and her gloved hands never stopped clutching that leather case. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house was a 2-story structure with a wide porch and lace curtains in every window. The older woman herself was sweeping the front steps when they approached, and her eyes lit up with the prospect of a new boarder. "Mrs. Patterson," Gideon said. "This is Miss Thompson. She's looking for a room." "Mrs. Thompson," Fiona corrected quietly, and Gideon felt an unexpected disappointment at the word. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened with sympathy. "Oh, you poor dear. A widow, come in, come in. I have a lovely room on the 2nd floor, quiet and private." "Mr. Jameson, if you would be so kind as to bring the trunk upstairs." Gideon followed them into the boarding house, up the narrow stairs to a room that overlooked the street. It was indeed quiet and clean, with a brass bed covered in a quilt and a small writing desk near the window. He set the trunk down at the foot of the bed and tipped his hat. "Thank you, Mr. Jameson," Fiona said, and he noticed she kept her back to the window, staying in the shadows. "You're welcome, Mrs. Thompson. If you need anything else, I work at the livery stable mostly, or I'm out at the Jameson Ranch west of town." He left before she could respond, but as he walked back to finish mending that fence, he could not get her out of his mind. There was something haunted about her, something broken that called to something inside him he had not known existed. Over the next week, Gideon found excuses to be in town more often than usual. He would see Fiona occasionally, always veiled, always alone, walking to the general store or the church. She never removed that black veil in public, and the town gossips were already spinning stories about what she might be hiding. Some said she was disfigured. Others claimed she was running from the law. A few of the crueler voices suggested she was simply vain and hiding the ravages of age. Gideon did not believe any of it. He had looked into her eyes during that brief first meeting, and he had seen pain there, yes, but also strength. Whatever secret Fiona Thompson carried, it was not born of vanity or criminality. It was on a Sunday morning when things began to change. Gideon was walking to church with his mother, a gentle woman named Margaret who had raised him and his 3 younger sisters after his father had died 5 years earlier. The church was a simple white building with a cross on top, and as they approached, Gideon saw Fiona standing outside, hesitating at the steps. "Go on ahead, Ma," he said softly. "I will be right there." Margaret gave him a knowing look but did not argue. Gideon walked over to where Fiona stood, noting how her gloved hands were clenched together. "Mrs. Thompson." She jumped slightly at his voice, then relaxed when she recognized him. "Mr. Jameson, good morning. Are you planning to attend the service? I was thinking about it, but I—" She trailed off, and Gideon understood. The veil, the stares, the whispers. "Would you like to sit with me and my family?" he offered. "My mother and sisters are very kind and they do not gossip." Fiona was quiet for so long he thought she would refuse. Then, so softly he almost missed it, she said, "Yes, I would like that very much." They walked into the church together, and Gideon led her to the pew where his mother sat with his sisters Emma, Catherine, and young Alice. Margaret smiled warmly at Fiona and made room for her. And though Gideon could feel the curious stares from other parishioners, his family created a small buffer of normalcy around her. After the service, Margaret invited Fiona to Sunday dinner at the ranch, and to Gideon's surprise, she accepted. They took the wagon out of town, and as they rolled through the Texas countryside, Gideon found himself pointing out landmarks and telling stories about growing up in Red River. Fiona listened quietly, occasionally asking questions, and he was pleased to hear genuine interest in her voice. The Jameson Ranch was not large by Texas standards, but it was well kept and prosperous. The house was built of sturdy wood with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Gideon's father had built it with his own hands, and Gideon had added onto it over the years. There was a barn, a chicken coop, a vegetable garden that his mother tended with fierce pride, and pastures where their cattle grazed. "It is beautiful," Fiona said as they pulled up to the house, and Gideon felt an unexpected warmth at her words. Dinner was a lively affair. Margaret had cooked a roast with potatoes and carrots, and there was fresh bread and apple pie. Emma, who was 20 and engaged to be married, chatted about her upcoming wedding. Catherine, 18, talked about the new schoolteacher who had arrived last month. Alice, who was only 14, asked Fiona a dozen questions about where she was from and what Boston was like. Fiona answered carefully, revealing little about herself but speaking eloquently about the city she had left behind. Gideon watched her throughout the meal, fascinated by the glimpses of personality that emerged when she felt safe. She had a quick wit and a musical laugh, though she seemed surprised each time the laugh escaped her lips, as if she had not expected to ever find joy again. After dinner, while Margaret and the girls cleaned up, Gideon offered to show Fiona around the property. They walked slowly in the late afternoon sun, and Gideon found himself talking more than he usually did, filling the silence with observations about ranching and the land. "Why did you come to Red River?" he finally asked when they had walked far enough from the house to have privacy. "It is not exactly a destination for people from Boston." Fiona was quiet for a long time. They had reached a fence line that overlooked a small creek, and she stood there, her hands gripping the rough wood. "I needed to disappear," she finally said. "I needed to go somewhere no one would know me, where I could start again." "You are running from something." "From someone," she corrected, and her voice hardened. "My husband was not a good man, Mr. Jameson. When he died 6 months ago, I thought I was free, but his family, They would not let me go. They wanted to control me, to use me, so I took what little money I could claim as mine and I left. Gideon absorbed this information, understanding now the widow's weeds, the secrecy. "You do not have to hide here," he said gently. "Whatever you are running from, it is far away. You are safe in Red River." "Am I?" She turned to look at him, and even through the veil he could feel the intensity of her gaze. "You do not know what I am hiding, Mr. Jameson. You do not know why I cannot remove this veil." "Then tell me." She laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "And have you look at me with pity? Or worse, with horror?" "I do not think I could ever look at you with horror," Gideon said, surprised by his own boldness. "I barely know you, Mrs. Thompson, but I know that much." Fiona turned back to the creek, her shoulders rising and falling with a deep breath. "My husband was a violent man. For the 5 years of our marriage, he found excuses to hurt me. Mostly where the bruises would not show, but toward the end, he stopped caring about appearances. The night he died, we had argued. He had been drinking, and he threw me against the fireplace. The iron poker was there, and when he came at me again, I picked it up. I did not mean to kill him. I only wanted him to stop." Gideon felt ice run through his veins, not at her confession, but at the anguish in her voice. "He fell," she continued, "hit his head on the hearth. And just like that, he was dead. The doctor ruled it an accident, and his family pretended to believe it, but I knew they suspected. They began watching me, controlling my movements, reading my mail. They said they were concerned for my well-being, but I think they wanted to punish me for taking their son away, even though he was a monster." "You defended yourself," Gideon said firmly. "That was not murder. That was survival. Perhaps." She reached up with one trembling hand and began to unfasten the veil. "But survival came at a price, Mr. Jameson. That night when he threw me into the fireplace, the poker was not the only thing there. The fire was still burning, and The veil fell away, and Gideon saw what she had been hiding. The right side of her face bore the unmistakable marks of a severe burn. The scar ran from her temple down to her jaw, puckered and discolored, pulling her eye slightly at the outer corner. It was the kind of injury that spoke of terrible pain and imperfect healing. But Gideon did not recoil. He did not gasp or turn away. Instead, he took a step closer and looked at her fully, taking in not just the scar but the whole of her face. Even marred by the burn, she was lovely. Her eyes were a deep green, intelligent and searching. Her mouth was full and expressive. The scar did not define her, though she clearly believed it did. "Thank you for trusting me," he said simply. Fiona blinked and tears spilled down her cheeks. "You are not repulsed?" "No." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched her unmarred cheek. "I see a woman who survived something terrible. I see courage and strength. The scar is part of your story, Mrs. Thompson, but it is not the whole story." She closed her eyes at his touch, and more tears came. Gideon realized with a start that this might be the first kind touch she had experienced in years. His heart ached for all she had endured, and he found himself wanting to protect her, to show her that not all men were monsters. "I should put the veil back on," she said, but she made no move to do so. "Not on my account," Gideon replied, "but if it makes you feel safer, I understand." She looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "Not here, not with you, if that is all right, more than all right." They stood there by the creek as the sun began to set, talking about everything and nothing. Fiona told him about her childhood in Boston, how she had been the daughter of a merchant who had fallen on hard times. Her marriage had been arranged to save her family from financial ruin, a bargain she had entered into willingly, not knowing the hell she was agreeing to. Gideon told her about his own life, about growing up on the ranch, about his father's death, and the responsibility of caring for his mother and sisters. When they finally walked back to the house, The veil remained off. Margaret and the girls had the grace not to stare at the scar, though Gideon saw the flash of sympathy in his mother's eyes. They loaded into the wagon to take Fiona back to town, and as they rode through the gathering darkness, Gideon felt something shift inside him. He had met this woman only a week ago, but already she had become important to him in ways he could not fully explain. Over the following weeks, Gideon found more and more excuses to be in town. He would stop by the boarding house to see if Fiona needed anything from the general store. He would offer to escort her to church. Gradually, she began to wear the veil less often, at least when she was with him. The town gossips continued to talk, but Gideon did not care, and Fiona seemed to be finding her courage. One afternoon, he brought her out to the ranch and taught her to ride. She had never been on a horse before, and she was terrified at first, but Gideon was patient. He started her on the gentlest mare they had, a sweet-tempered animal named Daisy who would not hurt a fly. He walked beside them for the first hour, one hand on Fiona's leg to steady her, talking her through every movement. "You are doing wonderfully," he encouraged as Fiona began to relax into the rhythm of the horse's gait. "See, Daisy likes you. I like her too," Fiona admitted, smiling. It was the first real, unguarded smile Gideon had seen from her, and it transformed her face. The scar became just another feature, insignificant compared to the joy in her eyes. By the time summer arrived, Gideon knew he was falling in love with her. It was not a sudden realization, but a gradual certainty that built with every conversation, every shared meal, every moment spent in her company. He loved her strength and her vulnerability, her intelligence and her humor, the way she was slowly learning to trust again. But he was also aware that Fiona was still healing, still learning to feel safe in her own skin. He did not want to rush her or make her feel pressured. So he waited, content to simply be near her, to be the steady presence she could rely on. It was Fiona who finally broke the unspoken barrier between them. They were sitting on the porch of the ranch house one evening in early July, watching the stars come out. Margaret and the girls had gone into town for a quilting circle, so they were alone. Fireflies danced in the darkness, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "Gideon," Fiona said softly, and he turned to look at her. "I need to tell you something." His heart clenched, fearing she was about to say she was leaving, that her husband's family had found her, that she could not stay in Red River after all. "I am falling in love with you," she continued, her voice steady despite the enormousness of the confession. "And it terrifies me. After everything with Charles, I swore I would never let another man have power over me. I swore I would never be vulnerable again. But you have been so patient, so kind, and I find myself wanting things I thought I could never have." Gideon reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I am falling in love with you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I think I have been since the day you stepped off that carriage. But Fiona, I need you to understand something. Love does not have to mean power over someone. It does not have to mean control or pain. The way I feel about you, it makes me want to protect you, yes, but also to stand beside you, to be your partner, not your master. I do not know if I know how to be in that kind of relationship," she admitted. "Charles never wanted a partner. He wanted someone to dominate, to break." "Then we will learn together," Gideon said. "I have never been married, never been in love like this before. We can figure it out as we go, at whatever pace you need." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat like that for a long time, holding hands and watching the stars. It was peaceful and right, and Gideon felt a contentment he had never known before. Their courtship, if it could be called that, continued through the summer and into the fall. Gideon was careful to always let Fiona set the pace, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. Their first kiss happened in September during the harvest festival in town. They had been dancing, Fiona laughing as Gideon spun her around, and when the music ended, they found themselves standing close, breathless and happy. "May I kiss you?" Gideon asked, and Fiona nodded. It was a gentle kiss, sweet and brief, but it felt like a promise. When they pulled apart, Fiona was crying, but she was smiling too. "That was my first kiss that did not come with demands attached," she whispered. "Thank you for asking." "I will always ask," Gideon promised. As autumn turned to winter, they began talking about the future. Fiona had found work helping Mrs. Patterson run the boarding house, and she had become an integral part of the Red River community. People no longer stared at her scar, and the gossips had moved on to other topics. She was simply Fiona now, the woman who worked at the boarding house and was courting Gideon Jameson. In December, on a cold evening when snow was just beginning to fall, Gideon asked her to marry him. They were in the barn at the ranch, and he had been helping her brush down Daisy after a ride. He had not planned it, had not prepared any grand speech, but the moment felt right. "Fiona, I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" She set down the brush and turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "Are you certain? I am damaged goods, Gideon. I come with scandal and scars and nightmares that still wake me in the middle of the night. You come with strength and courage and a heart that has survived more than most people could endure," he countered. "You are not damaged, Fiona. You are remarkable. And yes, I am certain. I have never been more certain of anything in my life." She threw her arms around his neck and kissed him, and when she pulled back, she was crying and laughing at the same time. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." They married in February of 1875, in the same white church where they had first sat together. It was a simple ceremony, attended by Margaret and Gideon's sisters, Mrs. Patterson, and a handful of other townspeople who had become Fiona's friends. Fiona wore a blue dress instead of white, and she did not wear a veil. Gideon thought she had never looked more beautiful than she did standing before him, speaking her vows with a clear, strong voice. The first months of marriage were an adjustment for both of them, but especially for Fiona. She had to learn to trust that Gideon's kindness was not a manipulation, that his desire for her did not come with violence attached. Gideon had to learn patience on a whole new level, learning to read her moods and respect her boundaries, even when he did not fully understand them. There were difficult nights when Fiona woke from nightmares, trembling and disoriented, sometimes not fully recognizing where she was. Gideon would hold her if she wanted to be held, or he would sit nearby if she needed space, talking softly until she came back to herself. "I am sorry," she would say, and he would shake his head. "You have nothing to apologize for. I am here, and I am not going anywhere." But there were also moments of pure joy. Mornings when Fiona would wake up smiling, reaching for him with none of the hesitation that had marked their early days. Evenings when they would sit on the porch and talk for hours about their dreams for the future. Afternoons when Fiona would ride out to meet him in the fields, bringing lunch and staying to help with whatever work needed doing. Margaret and the girls adored Fiona, and she bloomed under their affection. She taught Catherine to embroider and helped Emma plan her wedding. She read stories to Alice and helped Margaret with the endless work of running a household. She was becoming part of the Jameson family in truth, not just in name. In the summer of 1875, Emma married her sweetheart, a young rancher named Thomas, and moved to his property north of Red River. It was a bittersweet day for the family, but also a happy one. Fiona cried during the ceremony, and Gideon held her hand, knowing she was thinking of her own first marriage and how different it had been. "That could be us someday," she whispered to him. "Growing old together, watching our children get married. That will be us." Gideon corrected gently. I promise you that, Fiona. We have all the time in the world. As the months passed, Fiona continued to heal, not just physically but emotionally. The nightmares became less frequent. She smiled more easily. She began to talk about the future with hope instead of fear. And slowly, carefully, she began to let Gideon see all of her, the broken parts and the strong parts, the fears and the dreams. It was in the spring of 1876 that Fiona discovered she was pregnant. She had been feeling unwell for a few weeks, and when the doctor confirmed her suspicions, she felt a complicated tangle of emotions. Joy, certainly, but also fear. What kind of mother would she be with her scars and her past? Would she know how to love a child properly when she had received so little love herself? She told Gideon that evening, and his reaction erased many of her doubts. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure delight. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her tenderly. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Fiona, this is the best news I could have imagined." "You are not worried?" she asked. "About me being a mother, not even a little bit," he said firmly. "You are going to be an amazing mother. Our child is so lucky to have you." Fiona's pregnancy was not easy. She was sick frequently in the early months, and as she grew larger, she became uncomfortable and irritable. But Gideon was patient and attentive, rubbing her back when it ached, holding her hair when she was sick, making sure she ate even when food seemed unappealing. Margaret was a constant source of support as well, sharing wisdom from her own pregnancies and helping Fiona prepare for the baby's arrival. Catherine and Alice were excited about becoming aunts, and they spent hours sewing tiny clothes and blankets. The baby came in December, just before Christmas. It was a long, difficult labor that lasted through the night and into the following morning. Gideon paced outside the bedroom door, listening to Fiona's cries and feeling helpless. Margaret was with her, along with the midwife, Mrs. Chen, who had delivered half the babies in Red River. When the baby finally arrived, the crying that filled the house was the most beautiful sound Gideon had ever heard. Mrs. Chen opened the door and smiled at him. "You have a son, Mr. Jameson, a healthy, strong boy, and your wife is doing well." Gideon rushed into the room and found Fiona propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, and she smiled. "We have a son," she said softly. "Gideon, look at him. He is perfect." Gideon sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at his son. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving tiny fists in the air, his face red from crying. He was indeed perfect. "What should we name him?" Fiona asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Gideon thought for a moment, then said, "How about Samuel, after my father?" Fiona's eyes softened. "Samuel Jameson. I love it." The baby Samuel became the center of their world. Fiona proved to be a devoted mother, though she was also anxious in those early weeks, constantly worried that she was doing something wrong. Gideon helped as much as he could, getting up with her for nighttime feedings, walking the floor with Samuel when he was fussy, changing diapers and giving baths. "We are a team," he reminded Fiona when she apologized for waking him yet again. "That means we do this together." As Samuel grew from an infant to a toddler, Fiona's confidence grew as well. She discovered that she loved being a mother, loved watching her son discover the world. Samuel was a happy child, quick to laugh and curious about everything. He adored his father and followed Gideon around the ranch whenever possible, his little legs working hard to keep up. But he also had a special bond with his mother. Fiona would sing to him old songs from her childhood in Boston and tell him stories. As he got older and began to notice her scar, he would touch it gently with his small fingers. "Does it hurt, Mama?" he asked one day when he was about 3 years old. "Not anymore," Fiona said honestly. "It used to hurt very much, but not now." "I am glad," Samuel said seriously. "I do not want you to hurt." Fiona hugged him close, marveling at the capacity for love this small person had. He had never known violence or fear, and she was determined to keep it that way. In 1880, when Samuel was 3 years old, Fiona became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in the spring of 1881, she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Grace, and she was every bit as perfect as her brother. She had Fiona's green eyes and Gideon's easy temperament, and Samuel was immediately smitten with his baby sister. "I will protect her," he declared seriously, standing beside Fiona's bed and looking at the tiny baby in her arms. "I will not let anyone hurt her." "I know you will," Fiona said, her heart full. She looked at Gideon, who was watching them with such love in his eyes that it took her breath away. This was her family. This was the life she had never dared to dream of. The years passed in a pleasant rhythm. The ranch prospered under Gideon's careful management, and they were able to expand their holdings and hire a few ranch hands to help with the work. Catherine married in 1882, and Alice followed in 1884. Margaret grew older but remained healthy and active, doting on her grandchildren. Samuel and Grace grew up strong and loved, their childhood filled with the kind of joy and security that Fiona had never known. They learned to ride and rope, to plant and harvest, to value hard work and kindness. They knew their mother had a scar on her face, but to them, it was simply part of who she was, no more remarkable than her green eyes or her Boston accent. In 1885, when Samuel was 8 and Grace was 4, Fiona found herself pregnant once more. This pregnancy was unexpected but welcome, and in early 1886, she gave birth to another son. They named him Daniel, and he completed their family. By the time Daniel was born, Fiona barely remembered the frightened, broken woman who had arrived in Red River 12 years earlier. She still had moments of sadness when she thought about her past, still occasionally woke from nightmares, but they were rare now. The present was so much brighter than the past had been dark. One evening in the summer of 1890, Fiona and Gideon sat on the porch watching the sunset. Samuel, now 13, was teaching Grace and Daniel to fish down at the creek. Gideon's arm was around Fiona's shoulders and she was leaning into him, comfortable and content. "You ever regret it?" Gideon asked. "Coming to Texas, marrying me?" Fiona turned to look at him, surprised. "Never, not for one single moment. Why would you ask that?" "I just want to make sure you are happy," he said. "I know your life here is very different from what you knew in Boston." "It is better," Fiona said firmly. "So much better. Boston was beautiful, but it was also filled with pain and expectation and judgment. Here I am free to be myself. I have a family that loves me, work that fulfills me, a home that is truly mine. Gideon, you gave me a life worth living. How could I ever regret that?" He kissed her temple, and they sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Fiona said, "Do you remember the day we met? When you carried my trunk to the boarding house? Of course. You were hiding behind that veil, and I was curious about you from the very first moment." "I was so scared," Fiona admitted. "I thought I would spend the rest of my life hiding, that I would never be able to trust anyone again. And then you came along and you were patient with me. You never pushed, never demanded. You just loved me through all my broken parts." "You were never broken," Gideon said. "Wounded, yes, but not broken. You just needed time to heal." "Time and you," Fiona corrected. "I needed you, Gideon." "I still do." "Good," he said with a smile, "because you are stuck with me for the rest of our lives." As the years continued to pass, Fiona threw herself into the community life of Red River. She helped Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house less frequently now that she had 3 children to care for, but she remained involved in the church and the town's social activities. She organized charity drives for families in need and helped teach Sunday school. The people of Red River, who had once whispered about the mysterious veiled woman, now saw her as one of their own. Her scar had faded somewhat over the years, the angry red mellowing to a pale pink, but it was still visible. Occasionally, strangers would stare, but Fiona had long since stopped caring. The scar was part of her story, but it did not define her. She was a wife, a mother, a friend, a valued member of her community. The scar was just a mark on her skin. In 1895, Samuel turned 18 and announced his intention to study law. He wanted to go to college in Austin to learn how to help people who could not help themselves. Fiona was proud but also sad to see him go. Gideon was nothing but supportive, arranging for Samuel's tuition and expenses. "He is going to do great things," Gideon said as they waved goodbye to Samuel, who was riding out of Red River with determination in his eyes. "I know," Fiona said, wiping tears from her cheeks. "I just wish he did not have to grow up so fast." "That is the way of things," Gideon said gently. "We raise them to be independent, to find their own paths. It is hard, but it is right." Grace and Daniel were still at home, growing and changing every day. Grace was a spirited girl who loved horses and had a gift for training even the most difficult animals. Daniel was quieter, more thoughtful, and showed an early talent for drawing. They were good children, kind and respectful, and Fiona thanked God for them every day. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1897. She was 72 years old and had lived a full, happy life. Her death was a blow to the entire family, but especially to Gideon. He had lost his father young, and Margaret had been his anchor through all the years since. Fiona held him through his grief, understanding as few others could what it meant to lose someone so important. "She loved you very much," Fiona told him. "She told me once that I was the best thing that ever happened to you, and she thanked me for making you happy." "She was right," Gideon said, his voice thick with tears. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They buried Margaret in the Red River Cemetery, next to the grave of Gideon's father. The whole town turned out for the funeral, a testament to how beloved she had been. After the service, Fiona stood beside Gideon at the graveside, holding his hand, and she thought about how much her life had changed since she had first come to this town. She had arrived in Red River broken and afraid, hiding behind a veil, convinced she would never be whole again. But Gideon had seen past her wounds to the person beneath. He had loved her patiently and thoroughly, giving her the time and space she needed to heal. He had never asked her to be anything other than herself, had never tried to control or change her. And in return, she had given him everything she had. She had learned to trust again, to love again, to believe in happiness again. She had built a life with him that was filled with joy and purpose. She had given him children and a home and her whole heart. As they walked away from the cemetery, their children around them and their friends offering condolences and support, Fiona realized that she was not the same woman who had stepped off that carriage 23 years ago. That woman had been a survivor, yes, but also a victim, shaped by the cruelty of her past. The woman she was now was something different. She was strong and confident, scarred but not broken, loved and loving in return. She was Fiona Jameson, wife of Gideon, mother of Samuel, Grace, and Daniel, daughter-in-law to the late Margaret, friend to many in Red River. She was home. In 1900, as the new century dawned, the Jameson family gathered on the porch of the ranch house to watch fireworks in the distance, launched from town to celebrate the momentous occasion. Samuel was home from Austin, where he had passed the bar and was beginning to establish himself as a lawyer. Grace was 17 and being courted by a nice young man named Peter who worked at the bank. Daniel was 14 and talking about becoming an artist. Gideon was 52 now, his hair graying at the temples, but he was still strong and vital. Fiona was 46, her face lined with years but beautiful in a way that transcended physical appearance. The scar was still there, of course, but it had become just another part of her face, unremarkable to those who knew her. "Can you believe it has been 26 years since we met?" Gideon asked, his arm around Fiona's waist. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago," Fiona said, "and sometimes it feels like yesterday. Do you remember what you said to me that first day, that you needed to disappear?" "I do. I wanted to become invisible to hide from the world." "I am glad you did not stay hidden," Gideon said. "I am glad you let me in." "I am glad you were patient enough to wait for me," Fiona replied. "You saved my life, Gideon, not just physically but in every way that matters." "We saved each other," he corrected. "Before you, I was just going through the motions of living. You gave me purpose, joy, love. We built this life together." Fiona looked around at their children, at the ranch that had become her home, at the stars spreading out above them in the vast Texas sky. She thought about the long journey that had brought her here, from Boston to Red River, from fear to love, from hiding to living fully. "We did," she agreed, "and I would not change a single thing." As the fireworks continued to light up the night sky, Fiona leaned her head against Gideon's shoulder and closed her eyes. She could hear Samuel and Grace arguing good-naturedly about something, could hear Daniel's pencil scratching against his sketchbook as he tried to capture the moment. She could feel Gideon's steady heartbeat against her cheek and the warm breeze carrying the scent of honeysuckle. This was happiness. This was home. This was the life she had dreamed of during all those dark years with Charles, the life she had not believed could exist. And she had found it here in this dusty Texas town, with this patient, loving man who had seen her at her worst and chosen to love her anyway. The years continued to pass, bringing the usual mixture of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. Grace married Peter in 1902, and they settled in Red River, where Peter eventually became the bank manager. They gave Gideon and Fiona their first grandchild in 1903, a girl they named Margaret after Gideon's mother. Fiona cried when she held her granddaughter for the first time, overwhelmed by the continuation of the legacy, the proof that love could span generations. Samuel met a woman named Clara in Austin, a fellow lawyer who shared his passion for justice. They married in 1904, and Samuel brought her home to meet the family. Fiona liked Clara immediately, admiring her intelligence and independence. Samuel and Clara eventually moved back to Red River in 1906, opening a law practice together. They specialized in helping people who could not afford legal representation, and they quickly became known throughout the region for their fairness and skill. Daniel went to art school in New York City in 1905, much to everyone's surprise. He had always been the quietest of the three children, the one most content to stay home. But his talent was undeniable, and when he received a scholarship to a prestigious school, Gideon and Fiona encouraged him to take it. He promised to visit often, and he kept that promise, coming home every summer with new stories and new paintings. As Fiona entered her 50s and then her 60s, she found herself reflecting more and more on the journey of her life. She kept a journal, writing down memories and thoughts, wanting to preserve the lessons she had learned for her children and grandchildren. She wrote about her first marriage, not in detail but enough that they would understand where she had come from. She wrote about meeting Gideon, about learning to trust again, about building a life from the ashes of her old one. "Why are you writing all this down?" Gideon asked one evening, finding her at the desk in their bedroom, her hand moving steadily across the page. "For them," Fiona said, gesturing toward the window where their grandchildren were playing in the yard. "So they will know that no matter how dark things get, there is always hope. So they will understand that healing is possible, that love is worth fighting for." Gideon read over her shoulder for a moment, then kissed the top of her head. "They are lucky to have you." "We are all lucky to have each other," Fiona corrected. In 1910, Fiona and Gideon celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a big party, and friends from all over Red River came to celebrate with them. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and tears. Samuel stood up and talked about how his parents had shown him what a good marriage looked like, how they had taught him that love was built on respect and partnership. Grace talked about how her mother had overcome so much, how she was the strongest woman she knew. Daniel, who had come all the way from New York for the occasion, gave a speech that reduced everyone to tears, talking about the power of unconditional love and acceptance. But it was Gideon's speech that meant the most to Fiona. He stood up, this man she had loved for nearly 4 decades, and he looked at her with the same wonder and affection he had shown her from the very beginning. "35 years ago," he said, "a woman stepped off a carriage in Red River, and she changed my life forever. She was hiding behind a veil, carrying secrets and wounds that would have broken a lesser person. But Fiona was not broken. She was strong and brave, and she was willing to trust me when trust did not come easily to her. She let me love her and she loved me back, and together we built something beautiful. We built a family, a home, a life filled with more joy than I ever thought possible. Fiona, you are the love of my life, and I thank God every day that you got off that carriage in my town." Fiona was crying, and so was half the room. She stood up and walked to where Gideon was standing, and she kissed him in front of all their friends and family, not caring who saw. When they pulled apart, she said, "You loved me through every hidden wound, Gideon. You never gave up on me, even when I had given up on myself. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything." The party continued late into the night, and as Fiona danced with her husband under the stars, surrounded by the people they loved, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. Her life had not been easy, but it had been worth every struggle. The pain of her past had made her appreciate the joy of her present. The wounds had healed, leaving scars that told a story of survival and redemption. As the years moved into the 1910s, Gideon and Fiona began to slow down. The ranch was mostly run by hired hands now, though Gideon still went out every day to supervise and help where he could. Fiona spent her days tending her garden, writing in her journal, and playing with her growing number of grandchildren. Samuel and Clara had 3 children, Grace and Peter had 4, and Daniel had married a woman named Rose in New York, and they had 2 children. In the spring of 1915, Gideon had a heart attack while working in the fields. It was not fatal, but it scared everyone badly. The doctor ordered him to rest, to take it easy, and for a few weeks, Gideon complied. But he was restless and unhappy being idle, and gradually he returned to his usual routines, though he moved more slowly and tired more easily. Fiona watched him carefully, worried but also understanding. The ranch was Gideon's life, his passion, and asking him to stop working entirely was like asking him to stop breathing. So she did not nag or insist. She simply made sure he knew she was there, that she would support whatever decisions he made about his health and his work. One evening in the fall of that year, they were sitting on the porch as they had done countless times before. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Gideon's hand was in Fiona's, and they were comfortable in the silence. "I have been thinking," Gideon said, "about what comes next." "What do you mean?" Fiona asked, though she thought she knew. "I am not going to live forever," Gideon said bluntly. "The heart attack made that clear, and I want to make sure you are taken care of when I am gone." "Do not talk like that," Fiona said, her grip tightening on his hand. "You are fine. You are going to be fine." "Maybe," Gideon said, "but maybe not, and I need you to promise me something, anything. I need you to promise me that you will keep living, fully living, even after I am gone. Do not retreat back into that scared, hidden woman you were when we met. Stay strong, stay open. Let our children and grandchildren love you. Promise me." Fiona was crying now, but she nodded. "I promise, but only if you promise to stay with me as long as possible." "That I can do," Gideon said, and he pulled her close. Gideon lived for another 5 years, defying everyone's expectations. There were more health scares, more trips to the doctor, but he remained essentially himself, determined and stubborn and full of love for his family. He saw all of his grandchildren grow, attended school plays and birthday parties, and continued to give advice and support to anyone who needed it. He died peacefully in his sleep in January of 1920, with Fiona beside him. He was 71 years old, and he had lived a good, full life. Fiona woke up that morning to find him still and quiet, his face peaceful. She sat there for a long time, holding his hand, saying goodbye to the man who had been her partner, her love, her everything for 45 years. The grief was immense, a tidal wave that threatened to drown her. But Fiona remembered her promise to Gideon, and she held on. She leaned on her children and grandchildren, let them support her through the worst of it. She attended the funeral with her head high, accepting condolences from the entire town of Red River, which had loved Gideon almost as much as she had. In the months after Gideon's death, Fiona struggled to find her footing. The ranch felt empty without him, every corner holding a memory. But slowly, with the help of her family, she began to rebuild her life around the loss. She continued to write in her journal, now addressing her words to Gideon, telling him about their children's accomplishments and their grandchildren's antics. She tended her garden with renewed vigor, finding solace in the act of nurturing life. Samuel and Clara moved into the ranch house to help Fiona, and their presence was a comfort. Grace and Daniel visited often, and the house was frequently filled with the laughter of grandchildren. Fiona became the family matriarch, the one they all came to for advice and stories. She told them about their grandfather, keeping his memory alive through words and photographs. As Fiona entered her 70s, she remained active and engaged with life. She never remarried, never even considered it. Gideon had been her once-in-a-lifetime love, and she was content to honor his memory for the rest of her days. She continued to be involved in the community, helping with charity work and mentoring young women who were struggling in difficult marriages. In 1930, on what would have been her 55th wedding anniversary, Fiona sat on the porch of the ranch house and reread the journal she had kept for so many years. She read about her arrival in Red River, about meeting Gideon, about their courtship and marriage and all the years that followed. She read about her children's births, her grandchildren's arrivals, the joys and sorrows that had marked the decades. She closed the journal and looked out at the land that had become her home. She thought about the scared, wounded woman who had stepped off that carriage so many years ago, hiding behind a veil, convinced her life was over. That woman would never have believed the life Fiona had lived, the love she had known, the family she had built. Gideon had loved her through every hidden wound, had been patient with her healing, had given her the space and support to become whole again. And in return, she had loved him with everything she had had built a life with him that was filled with meaning and purpose and joy. The scar on her face was barely visible now, faded to the palest pink, just another line among the many that age had etched into her skin. It no longer bothered her, had not for decades. It was simply part of her story, a reminder of where she had been and how far she had come. Fiona lived to the age of 83, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1937, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She had lived to see 12 grandchildren and 7 great-grandchildren, had seen her sons and daughter become successful and happy, had watched Red River grow from a small frontier town into a thriving community. At her funeral, Samuel stood up and read from the journal his mother had kept, sharing her story with everyone gathered. He read about her arrival in Red River, about meeting his father, about the long journey from fear to love. There was not a dry eye in the church when he finished. "My mother taught us that no wound is too deep to heal," Samuel said. "She taught us that love is patient and kind and powerful enough to overcome anything. She taught us that scars are not something to be ashamed of, but are instead a testament to our strength and survival. She lived a remarkable life, and we are all better for having known her." They buried Fiona next to Gideon in the Red River Cemetery, beneath a large oak tree. The headstone read, "Fiona Thompson Jameson, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and friend. She arrived broken but left whole. She was loved and she loved well." The legacy of Fiona and Gideon lived on through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper, passed down through the generations. The journal Fiona had kept was preserved and eventually published, becoming a treasured family heirloom and a testament to the power of love and healing. The story of the woman who arrived by carriage, hiding a painful secret, and the cowboy who loved her through every hidden wound, became part of the history of Red River. It was told and retold, a reminder that no matter how dark the past, there is always hope for the future. That love can heal even the deepest wounds. That scars are not the end of the story, but simply another chapter. And in the hearts of all who knew them, Fiona and Gideon lived on, their love story a beacon of hope and redemption that would shine for generations to come. They had found each other in a dusty Texas town in 1874, 2 broken souls who fit together perfectly. And they had built a life that was beautiful and meaningful and full of love. That, in the end, was the greatest legacy of all. Not the ranch or the family name or the journal, but the simple, profound truth that love can transform everything. That with patience and kindness and commitment, 2 people can heal together and build something that lasts far beyond their own lifetimes. The carriage that had brought Fiona to Red River was long gone, rotted away to nothing. But what she had found there, what she and Gideon had created together, remained. It remained in the land they had worked, in the children they had raised, in the community they had served, and in the hearts of everyone who had been touched by their love. It was a love that had started with a question, a simple offer of help from a cowboy to a frightened woman. And it had grown into something extraordinary, a partnership that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger each time. A love that had healed wounds both visible and invisible, that had created beauty from pain, that had proven that happy endings were possible even for those who had suffered the most. In the end, Fiona had found what she had been searching for when she boarded that carriage in Boston all those years ago. She had found safety and peace and acceptance. She had found a place where she could be herself, scars and all, without fear of judgment or violence. She had found a partner who saw her, truly saw her, and loved what he saw. And Gideon had found what he had not even known he was searching for. He had found a woman who challenged him and inspired him, who brought light and laughter into his life, who made every day better simply by being in it. He had found his purpose and his passion, his present and his future. Together they had found home. Not just a physical place, though the ranch was certainly that, but an emotional home, a place of belonging and safety and unconditional love. They had found it in each other, and they had spent 45 years building on that foundation, creating something that would outlast them both. The sun set on Red River every evening, painting the sky in brilliant colors before giving way to the stars. And in that cycle of day and night, in the endless rhythm of the seasons, in the passage of time that brought change and growth and eventually endings, the love story of Fiona and Gideon remained constant. A reminder that some things transcend time, that some bonds are truly unbreakable, that some loves are eternal. They had lived and loved and left a mark on the world that would never fade. And that was more than enough. It was everything.